Mirco Kater, Information Security Officer at Gitpod. Mirko, I'm really looking forward to this one here today because you and I work together at another company in Stana, where you built our first security and compliance program. And I know it. I remember how big of a differentiator it was for us because it gave us access to markets and customers. And I know you always framed, like, some people frame security and compliance as the department of no. I actually used that word from you, and you completely turned it around. You were the department of enablement. So I'm so excited to talk about how you build security and compliance programs because it's not your first rodeo. And so let's dive right in. Before we talk about this, give us your baseball card, Mirko. What got you into this? What have you done before taking on this current position at Gitpod?
Sure. So thank you. Great to be here. Yeah, where do I start? Basically, I started off as a consultant in data privacy. So this is when, in 2018, GDPR came in, and I connected that with security compliance consulting. So basically, making sure to implement security frameworks so our customers could, live up to requirements. And as a consultant back then, it was important to make sure that, we are implementing these frameworks as good as possible without not too much interruption. And through my role as a consultant, I connected with some people at Instana, which actually landed me into that position where I then took up my first role as a information security officer, right? So yeah, pretty much same challenges, right? At Instana, we wanted to make sure that we can start to sell to enterprises with lots of different requirements. At the same time, we have been a startup, so we needed to make sure to remain agile. And yeah, that was a pretty exciting start. So yeah, what should we talk about next?
Yeah, I think you just mentioned a major insight is at a lot of startups want to sell to the enterprise, but don't make the necessary. Like, it's easy to obviously not easy, but spin up a conversation. But are you actually enterprise ready to sell? And I think that was one of our differentiators at Instana. Maybe as a background, Instana was performance monitoring for microservices, and and we were enterprise ready, right, which allowed us to capture these big contracts pretty much early on, and you were one of the enablers. So let's talk about how you've built these security and compliance programs, both at Instana and today at Gitpod, because I know you have a 5-step framework. And also maybe just also layer on a little bit about what Gitpod does exactly for a little bit of context. It's still a tech company, but I think the context of what they do is probably important as well. So let's maybe start with that. Give us like sort of the 20-second overview of what Gitpod does, and then we can go into your 5-step program.
Oh, sure. So yeah, Gitpod is providing remote development environments. The goal is to remove friction from setting up developer environments locally. So the goal is just click on a button and get ready to code. And yeah, this is very roughly what Gitpod is doing. And yeah, so about getting started. Yeah, 5-step framework I'm using. You've mentioned it already. So the very first thing, and basically you can do this during your first 90 days at a startup company. A very first thing you should do is connect with people, right? Don't go in there thinking, hey, you are the awesome security person. You know all the answers. You will shift everything from left to right. No, not at all. You want to enable the business, right? You want to be a servant of the mission. So your own perspective, do have that. That's fine. But first up, talk with leadership. What are they trying to achieve? Usually security and compliance is, the business of revenue protection, but also actually a prerequisite to get access to markets. So where do they want to sell to? What do they think the customers are? In which geographical locations do they want to sell to? This will have huge differences later on in what kind of strategy you need to pick. Talk to your peers. What challenges are they facing on a daily basis? Talk to the rest of the business, like what are, the most stupid risks nobody is taking care of. Or maybe something like, okay, what controls are getting into your way? Stuff like that, really. You want to make sure that you connect with everyone because, security just isn't a one-person shop. You need everyone to be in the same boat, and you want to make sure that you also get as much information as possible from these people, right? There's so much knowledge you can gain by talking to people. And yeah, once you've done that and got some sort of a understanding of what the environment entails, start to assess. That's the second step. So what is there? What controls does the company already have, right? You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Look at the controls that are there. See if you need to adjust something or if you can just take it as it is. Look at what data you're processing. If you take the Instana and Gitpod example, Instana was processing performance metrics, right? That's different to, Gitpod processing your source code or a health provider processing health information, right? There are huge differences in risk levels. And you want to make sure to understand that so you can, again, align your strategy with that. What are your crown jewels, right? What significance does your solution has to your clients? Is it that if you go down, minor interruption, no problem? Or do your clients extremely depend on you? And yeah, last but not least, in which regulatory environment do you operate in? Like all of that will be relevant to what you do next. And that's step 3, defining a security strategy. So you've connected with everyone. So you know where the business is heading to. You know the challenges. You know what's there. And you know what the goal is. So you want to make sure, and again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to come up with everything yourself. The InfoSec community has lots of frameworks you can just look into. Basic ones are ISO and SOC 2. Like this is usually where you get started. These are like minimum requirements for a lot of companies to even consider a SaaS vendor. And then there are also NIST, of course, and lots of local frameworks, especially if you want to contract like governmental entities. In the United States, that would be FedRAMP, for example. And all of these frameworks, they come in different flavors. They also come in different, let's say, like SOC 2 gives you a lot of room on how you can design a control. So you can really make things risk-based and align that with the risk level you have at your organization. While others such as NIST, they will be very specific on what you need to do. Also, things like PCI, they are very specific. Yeah, once you've got that strategy defined, right? So once you have your risk level and sort of the frameworks you will need to comply with to satisfy the challenges, you want to go implement. As I mentioned before, security isn't a one-person job. So let's hope in step 1, connect. You have connected with various people and they sort of know the mission. They know what the problems are. And you will get them into your boat and implement what's necessary to make sure that you can meet goals. You're not supposed to do everything by your own. Definitely not. You basically can't. It's a team job. So, establish that oversight over the overall program and be sure to get things implemented step by step. Be sure to monitor it. And once you've done that, go start measuring stuff. Because the best security program at all, it doesn't really matter if you don't understand or can find out how well it's working. So set up measures, or basically look at your goals, see how you can measure them, and then see if what you did positively impacted, reaching these goals. And yeah, this is pretty much, where to get started. Like, these are the 5 steps for your first 90 days at like a startup environment, to start with security and compliance.
I was listening quietly here. Frameworks are so powerful because they help people break down something complex into something that's more consumable. So just to repeat your 5 steps, I'm just going to repeat the 5 verbs, right? Connect, assess, define, implement, measure. Those are the 5 steps. Connect, assess, define, implement, measure. And that's your first 90 days as a information security officer or chief information security officer, same thing. This is fascinating. And I think you also mentioned a nugget there in terms of it really matters what industry you're in, right? What your product does. At Instana, we were monitoring production critical workloads, right? But when we went down, if we had gone down, we didn't, right? But it wasn't critical, right? The world wouldn't stop for our customers. But if Gitpod goes down, they cannot develop code anymore, right? So that's a problem. And so I would assume you get more scrutiny from your customers. And good security and compliance means access to markets and these customers.
Absolutely. Yeah, you want to be aware of that so you can, focus on the controls that are right for your organization. If you start bothering your team with, let's say, nonsense, they will stop listening to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that will make your job far more difficult than it should be. So, be aware of that.
Yeah. So let's break down these steps here. Let's double click on what's happening here in detail. Step number 1, connect. Meaning you connect with your peers, with the company. And then maybe just for context, at Instana, you joined, I think, when we were like probably 40 to 50 people, right? Mm-hmm. And at Gitpod, I don't know, how many people was Gitpod when you joined? 30
Almost
maybe?
same number. Yeah, it was a little bit less. Gitpod was a bit more early staged, which I actually appreciated. Right, the earlier the better to start off with these things. It's easier to move a small organization into a certain direction versus having thousands of people that suddenly need to do stuff differently. So yeah.
I remember how at Instana was like, why didn't we do this sooner, right? And I guess Gitpod, also with the connection there through Instana, is like they probably realized that. So yeah, the earlier the better. So what was the decision? Like, I would assume you had conversations with the founder and the CEO when they approached you. Like, what was sort of the need they were trying to? Were they realizing, oh, I need to be secure and compliant now because I need access to markets? What was the first conversation with the founders before you started?
Yeah, it was pretty much around, getting into markets. At some point, as a startup, you develop your product. You might have a few design customers that do not really impose like lots of requirements on you. But if you want to get those bigger deals, you are suddenly faced with large security assessments, requirements such as SOC 2. As I mentioned, like for lots of companies, this is like a minimum requirement, right? If you don't have that, we won't even consider your solution. And, usually engineering is like, and lots of that responsibility lies on CTOs, and they are sort of required to deal with all of that, but they should be developing products. Like that's what they are working on, and all of that security stuff, security and compliance stuff on the sidelines. This is lots of noise for them, and that's then usually where I get in, right? So you have a CTO sitting there, who's like, yeah, here's all of that stuff I'm supposed to do. I can't duplicate myself, multiply myself to, work on both things simultaneously. So I need someone who can, who's dedicated to that role, who has oversight around the whole program, and who basically also can jump into customer calls and answer their questions, answer their assessments, and then also, improve and maintain the program, talk to auditors and whatnot. Like that is just a dedicated role. You can't. It's very difficult to just do that, as a side job. That's very hard. So this is essentially what we had been discussing, and again, it started off with getting access to markets, getting deals signed. That was like the important step there, really, that started everything off. They always have been like security focused from an engineering perspective, but compliance is also like a different game there. So yeah.
And then obviously the size of the company matters, because the bigger it is, the more people you need to talk to. But also, once you go to the implement phase, step 4, it means it's going to touch more people, right? So I think one insight is like, the earlier the better. And we're talking in the context of startups and fast growing companies, right? If you're a Fortune 500 company, it's obviously different. But who are your main stakeholders during the step 1 process connect? Is it, you mentioned the CTO, the CEO? Who else do you talk to in terms of like groups, maybe also, and departments in the company, sales?
Yeah. So I tend to. That sounds a little bit fluffy now, but I tend to speak with everyone, really, because everyone is like a participant of that mission, and I will need everyone to work with the organization so we can actually go through these frameworks and fulfill all these requirements. But yeah, I think main focus area, as you mentioned, CEO, CTO, CFO possibly. They also have like a great insight into any risks and whatnot. Engineering managers, they usually understand very well how the teams are working. Technical leads, they have great insight into the product, like the technical issues that might be there, that might be underneath, and also specific risks maybe that haven't been covered. Sales, super important. Like they will definitely have some things on their wish list so they can make sure that sales cycles are quickly done. You don't want to have that many questions. You want to get the idea signed as quickly as possible. And that's I guess like these are the most fundamental ones to talk to. But of course, you also want to speak with marketing and whatnot. You want them all to sit inside your sandboard, because also marketing, they might be tasked with, I don't know, designing your website. They should be aware of I don't know, privacy compliance related stuff. Like if they start implementing, I don't know what kind of user tracking, and never gathering any consent, not communicating that anywhere inside any privacy policy, then you will have different problems later on, and that can also come up in security assessment. So basically, yeah, you really want to have spoken to everyone as good, as far as possible. Make sure they understand what you are doing, why you are there for, and also that you are there to help them, right? If they come up with, hey, we want to do something new, the worst answer you can give is, no, we can't do that. At least give them an alternative approach, and that will make them happy and will enable you to make a good job.
I love how you just laid out how security and compliance touches every department within the company. There's always an aspect. So, and no joke, right? You got to talk to everyone. After the connect phase, which is step one. So step two is then assess. Now you have this body of knowledge. By the way, how do you record that body of knowledge? I'm getting very specific. Like, do you have a notebook? Do you write it down? Do you take transcripts? Do you have a Notion repository? Like, where do you record that information?
Yeah, that's a challenge on its own, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I tend to do like lots of note taking. Because yeah, if I haven't written something down, it's gone in a week or
Mm-hmm.
something. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of note taking and creating documentation and stuff. Um, as one of my peers here at Gitpod tends to say, the best answer comes with a link to the documentation. So yeah, I do agree on that. I had to learn it the hard way. Of course, you can also do anything else, as you mentioned, like do recordings, transcripts, whatever helps you the best way to retain that knowledge as good as possible.
I love this answer. The best answer comes with a link to the documentation. This is I'm going to use this going forward. I'll credit you.
Well, credit him, actually.
Yeah. So assess, right? Taking inventory. Is that people, process, technology? Like when you it basically answers the question, what do we have, right? Like how do you what does that entail, that process, the second step, assess?
Yeah, it's time to bring out the drawing board. And some say it might not be the most fun aspect of the job. I do like it. It's exciting. Yeah, as you mentioned, you write everything down: processes, technologies, people. What do you have there really, and what's extremely important? Like there's that famous saying. I guess everybody heard that by now. You can't protect what you can't see, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to get to the bottom of, okay, what do we have where, so you can actually focus on what matters. What technology are you using? So what threats are existing against your technology stack, so you can just provide controls that mitigate that successfully.
Mm-hmm. Can I jump in?
Mm-hmm.
So when you make an assessment of the threats, how real is it? And what are some maybe specific examples you can share from your past experiences? Like even if you're a small company, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, what are some common mistakes, pitfalls you see, and then maybe also actual threats from third actors? Like what is the spectrum of things you've seen?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Like risk management can be, or risk evaluations, they can be very theoretical. I guess something everybody knows is, getting victim to a ransomware attack. You're looking at how can that happen, and then do we actually have vulnerabilities in place that enable that? There can be things such as misconfigurations or like permissions being like completely all over the place, which could just result into a huge blast radius should something ever get compromised. And especially like in the environments I've seen today, this has been a very important aspect. Like there are so many accounts, credentials, keys, whatnot. You really want to make sure that these are scoped as they should be, and that you have some kind of monitoring in place to see if something blew up, because otherwise you're just wandering through the dark, not knowing what actually happens there.
Mm-hmm. So the assess phase is both an assessment of like, what do we have in terms of, processes, tools, people, measures, right? But also like what has happened, right? And what could potentially happen to us right now. So it's sort of like it's truly the assess, like now we know what we're up against and what we have in place.
Exactly. Yeah, some people tend to work with like heat maps.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you have some kind of a spreadsheet where you have your threats listed, and you add some subjective values to those threats to at the end see, okay, this is something we really should take care of, and this also gives you like a foundation to talk to leadership again. If you're defining your strategy, like, okay, these are the things we really should watch out for. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and for threats in itself, you can really get creative on this one.
Mm-hmm.
A threat also might be losing business, not closing deals. That might also be a threat, right? And that might also help you to position aspects of your security program, because this is where people tend to listen into, especially if you talk to CEOs or whatnot. If you come up with very technical specifics and details, they might no longer listen to you. So
Yeah.
make sure that there is a risk where they really think, oh, damn, yeah, we should take care of that, because I can't sleep well if this stays open. So yeah, it's both. Doing a huge inventory of what you have. It doesn't need to be one by one everything, but you should know what your company entails and consists of, and then assessing what risks are unique to those assets, and what of that is really realistic and could, if it happens, even just happens once, what could just blow up the entire company. You just need one huge security incident to undo years of work, and that's really not much you want to go through.
And any anecdotes you can share where you uncovered things that could have blown up, but in the end didn't because you fixed it?
Yeah, that's the thing with insurances, right?
Yeah.
So if you have them but nothing happens, it feels like wasted money. If something happens and you don't have it, oh damn.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so far, luckily, didn't suffer like any. Also, like in my past career, there wasn't like huge breaches or anything like that. But of course, there are lots of unknowns. Would something have happened if we've done X, Y, and Z? At the end, we just want to make sure that risk levels are, appropriate, like that we can, if you can fall asleep at night, that's where it should, that should be your goal. If you stay awake the entire time, something might be wrong.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's anything else in the assess phase? I think we've covered it. So the deliverable from phase one, from step one connect, is our notes, right? Documentation, transcripts. The deliverable of phase two, you mentioned like maybe you start with whiteboarding, but it's probably an inventory. It's probably a list of things we're doing, contacts, maybe diagrams of how things interact with each other. What are the deliverables of phase two?
Yeah, pretty much what you've mentioned, right? So basically, you should have some sort of an inventory of both, controls, assets, risks, and that will help you, with the next step.
So let's talk about the next step, which is define, where you define your strategy. How do you take the deliverables from step two to now go to step three and define what are the activities? What do you do?
Yeah, so here we now, what challenge we want to solve, what market we are looking into, what data we have. And for some kind of data, like if you are a healthcare provider, it will be pretty clear into what frameworks you will need to look at, something like HIPAA and whatnot, if you're operating inside the United States, for example, and lots of different things. So from here run out, you know your risk level, you know what's there, and you can just freely select frameworks inside the InfoSec community to make sure you can reach your goals. At Instana, it has been we are processing basic information, basic performance metrics. So we do want to make sure we are secure. We don't need to build like Fort Knox in the sense of that, very sensitive data will get lost. But yeah, we want to make sure to be able to sell inside the US, but also to European clients. So we picked a SOC 2 that gives us flexibility on how we can design controls. So we took that standard and adjusted it to our own needs. And if you have something like SOC 2 or ISO, you can also look into other frameworks such as NIST that gives you more specific examples on how to design a certain control to maybe meet some enterprise requirements. CIS benchmarks are also there, like lots of frameworks, whatever you want to. Somebody has already written it down, I think, and it helps you to not start off from scratch, right? You can take these into consideration, see, okay, how's my risk level? Do I really want to go all in and possibly make user experience worse? That can be for your customers, but also for folks internally. Or can I open it up and still have an appropriate level of security, mitigating the risk, but still allowing good user experience.
Yeah.
And
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, all good. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just listing out the frameworks we covered: NIST, SOC 2, HIPAA compliance, CIS benchmarks. When we prep, we also talked about PCI. I think those are some of the most popular frameworks and most important ones. I know there's some. I mean, right now there's also in the European Union. There's NIS, right? NIS as well. That's another one.
Yeah, and certainly, like in Europe, ISO is pretty well known. From my experience, I got the feeling that the Europeans, they know about ISO, they know about SOC 2. Inside the United States, they know about SOC 2. So that's you can sort of get both with one cert. Some companies still do both. These standards are relatively similar. They just have a different approach, but overall they are the same. FedRAMP is also there if you want to sell to US governmental entities. And then there are, I guess like every country basically has their own, version of these more or less.
And I assume, I mean, every company has additional custom policies, right? Then those need to be implemented as well internally.
Definitely, yeah. And that also depends on your regulatory environment, right? So things like GDPR, they also want you to make sure that your security controls that they are just, appropriately designed. And security frameworks such as SOC 2 and ISO, they are one way of fulfilling this requirement. So yeah, it's all connected to each other. And yeah, it can be very custom. Don't expect every company to be the same there.
Yeah. So then when you define the strategy is about making choices. Like what is our goal, right? What is the challenge that we need to overcome? What are the resources that we have? And what are the things we say yes to? And what are the things we say no to? What is the framework to nail down your strategy? And what's the output out of step 3, define?
Yeah, it should be, from my perspective, it should be some sort of a document outlining what you are going to do in the next couple of, 1 year at least, maybe 1 to 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something you should be able to discuss with leadership, to get that signed off. Like, okay, yeah, we are on the same page. This is what we want to do. And that will also help you inside the next phases, if it's about implementing your strategy, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Okay, so that's really, it's a plan, right? That
It's a
comes
plan.
with the strategy, yeah, where you start, okay, this is what we're going to do, and then you have something you can execute. So you get buy-in, obviously, right?
Mhm.
I assume you propose certain things, you get your stakeholders to say yes to those things, or maybe no, whatever, or by when, and then you have a plan, which I guess takes us to step 4, implement, right? Like now we go into action.
Yeah.
What happens there?
That's the most exciting part and can be the most challenging one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's step 4. I hope you've done a good job at connecting with people because you now need all of them, your peers, the different business units, to implement the controls you thought about. And you don't just go in there and say, yeah, I have a mandate by leadership. We are implementing this right now. Explain them like a normal human being on why we are doing this and what we are trying to accomplish with this.
Mm-hmm.
And this will also, usually people will understand and they will try their best to get things implemented as you intend to. So yeah, this is basically, having a list of controls, having or tasks, if you like. It's basically this part is sort of project management, right? You have your project, you have your tasks, you have lots of different stakeholders and DRIs, and you are overseeing the implementation of these tasks within certain time frames, so you can achieve goals such as, I don't know, having an audit in 3 months and getting
Mm-hmm.
started with that and getting, a fancy new badge on your website um, in a certain time frame. So this is what implement is about. You want to monitor that whole process, and you also want to verify that things have been really implemented as intended, right? You can't just, I mean, you can, but just shouting something from your ivory tower and thinking like, okay, that's done and dusted. No.
Yeah.
You can be up to a bad surprise if suddenly controls hadn't been implemented, or you're sitting there and suddenly audit. You're like, hey, do we have evidence for that? And people like, oh yeah, there was that task, right? Yeah, we haven't been able to take care about that because we were stuck with different things. Yeah, you do want to be, constantly speaking to your stakeholders about the implementation of those. You want to make sure to meet certain deadlines and have everything in place when it should be.
Mhm. Yeah. So those are the controls you put. I mean, security and compliance are never done, right? There is no,
Yeah, sure.
oh, now we're done, right? It's
Yeah,
a continuous process, right? But I guess the implement phase is so important because you're putting the right processes and tools and people into place, right? That you can actually start working on security and compliance. Um,
exactly.
what is some of the friction you can encounter in step 4?
Oh,
Implement.
mhm. That's a very good question. There are lots of things that can cause friction. Like one example is if you do not really explain why you are doing something. So if people don't understand why certain controls are being put into place, they might be resistant to that, and they also possibly they don't play along, right? If I'm very like if I don't like a control, I tend to work around it, and that's one of the worst possible outcomes you can have there. So be sure to explain things very well. Also for people that possibly they don't like change. So
Yeah, surprise.
so that can be inside there. So yeah, really being um, basically as on the same level as them, like not from the ivory tower, just talk what you're trying to achieve there and be open for suggestions. Just because it has been written down inside the plan, it doesn't need to, like, it isn't set into stone and it doesn't need to happen that exact way. I've learned during implementation phases, I've learned so much from peers and people from business units where we thought like, oh, actually you are right. Like if we make this a little bit different, we still have like a great control in place. better user experience. Like it's win-win, and then people feel like they are part of the process, right? Not just somebody who needs to live out the consequences. But yeah, it makes it really part of the mission, and people are more engaged there, so that can help to remove that friction. So really being open to feedback, making sure to explain why we are doing things. I think these are important steps to remove friction. Of course, list can be large. You can also have issues like, we don't have time to implement something. You definitely will hear this as well, but yeah, there should be, this is something you should just talk about with, possibly also then leadership. Like, okay, what's more important now? Getting that control for audit X implemented, or do we want to have that feature in place to satisfy design customer Y? And that's legitimate. Like each direction can be fully legitimate, but don't go in there and trying to force everything into your direction. That just, I personally think that won't work well, and especially like later on. Yeah, people are just the most important, is the most important aspect in security, I think. And you really want to basically play in the same team with everyone, right? Don't play against them. Like you need those people, and they need you as well. Like everybody's just striving to, make the company and the product a success. And
yeah. How does, because implementation, what are we talking about timeline here? Because we're within the first 90 days. When does usually the implement phase kick in?
Yeah, that can be different depending on, well, that's the consultant's favorite response. It depends.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does depend on like the framework you are selecting. Like for SOC 2, for instance, at Gitpod we made that extremely fast. Like in 3 months, we directly started implementation because we had a type 2 audit coming out. We also skipped type 1 and everything. We just thought like, okay, let's do like the real deal directly, full type 2 audit. So we started very quickly, of course, with frameworks such as, like, if you really want to implement NIST and FedRAMP, which is very similar or is existing of NIST controls. Then it takes way longer, right? Then it will take a year or something. So during the implementation phase, I guess you will start with like very fundamental things. Not the entire control set, but fundamental things like having something like risk management in place is usually where you should get started, right? Yeah, designing your first policies, your first processes around vulnerability management, like the very, very foundation of things, incident management as well. And yeah, that might be then done throughout the rest of the year.
Oh, can you maybe double click on that a little bit, like those foundational elements? You said vulnerability management, incident management. What are some other components here or foundational building blocks that you're looking for?
Yeah, good point. I guess change management is another aspect. Like you want to make sure any change to your product, go through a certain control or approval mechanism, so you can understand who did what when. What else could be there? Okay, so incident management we had, right? Vulnerability management we had, risk management we had. Possibly also you want to get started on business continuity. So you have disaster recovery plans in place for like very critical applications. What do we do if something breaks down entirely? Like if you deem that to be a realistic scenario, that could happen like very soon, being prepared as as fast as possible is a good thing. I think, and it also goes back to like the risk level we've discussed earlier. Like what significance do you have there, and what happens if your service fails? Should that ever happen, you just don't want to be in a situation where you then start asking those questions. Okay, what should we do now? Ideally, you have that defined already. But yeah, I think those are like the very, very basics. Of course, there can be a lot more. It really depends, again, on risk level and whatnot. But those I would consider basic. Like you should get started with those as soon as possible.
On the infra, I mean, there's no shortage of 5-letter acronyms in security, right? What are we talking about on the maybe on the infrastructure side? Cloud, maybe CSPM, cloud security posture management comes to mind. What are any categories where you recommend starting?
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. And so I personally, I'm a huge fan of cloud. How are they called? Cloud Native Application Protection Platform, CNAP. Yeah, well,
CNAP.
first try. Wow. Up until the next synonym comes, and
Yeah.
I'm a fan of those because they are trying to offer you like a single pane of glass to assess the majority of your cloud security infrastructure. So that includes cloud posture management, like how have you configured things? That includes I think it was SIAM
CM or no,
CIAM,
SIAM with an S or with a C?
with a C. This one.
Oh, the C. Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management, I think.
So yeah, I think that's it. Oh, you could play some kind of a bingo around that, right? That was
yes.
So yeah, that's dealing around permissions. Like it's very hard. It's very difficult to review permissions actually, and to make sure that you are applying that privilege of least knowledge. But these tools can help you to see, okay, what has been actually used, like what permissions had been in place here, and that can help you to then actually remove permissions that are unnecessary, reduce blast radius should something ever blow up, and last but not least, you have some sort of vulnerability scanning inside those tools. Like, are there some CVEs that haven't been covered? Some tools, they also tend you to offer like an attack path analysis. Like they look at, okay, is this asset exposed? Is there a certain CVE? It doesn't even just need to be the critical ones, right? That's something people tend to forget. Also, like the low severity ones, they can cause big friction if exploited. So they might help you with that because alert fatigue is a huge problem with security tools and whatnot. Like there's just so much stuff they want to take. You need to take care about. All of these things they help you to just narrow something down, reduce noise, and last but not least, yeah, some kind of a threat detection engine, like an anomaly detection that shows you, hey, there is that service account, I don't know, it's accessed from an area which I haven't ever seen before, and it's speaking to services it never did before, and it's asking for data. It shouldn't even. So that's pretty helpful to understand if your environment is getting compromised, and it might also be a way to not impact the infrastructure too much. All right, so you're just listening, you're just monitoring and seeing, okay, is something suspicious going on here? If you tend to automatically block stuff, again, depending on your risk level, you might want to have that. But yeah, that can, of course, also, go wrong pretty quickly.
So there's no shortage of frameworks and tools and categories of security compliance. So it that's why it helps to have a pro like you, right? Who has sort of like the overview of the landscape. So okay, so step 4 then is implementing these measures, and that takes us to step. So the output of step 4 is then, okay, we're putting these systems and measures and processes into place, and now you need to know if they work, if they're working, and if they're actually helping, right? Which is, I guess, step 5, measure. Let's talk about step 5, measure and the metrics. What do you do there?
Yeah, step 5. Yeah. So this is where we want to understand if what we have done is actually working out as intended. So yeah, look at your goals and try to measure them objectively. Like one, I think, basic example, if you are going to implement something like security awareness, how does, the number of incidents relate to that? They reduce? Is there like a different click rate? Is the team clicking everything, or is like the training working as intended and people just report it directly? Did they actually report? That's also like a useful metric you can put in there. That would be for security awareness. You can also make it a lot more sales specific. Like if you care about getting access to markets, you want to make sure that you close deals in a certain amount of time. All right, that there aren't too many showstoppers or blockers, maybe that there aren't any at all. So you could also come up with that as a metric. So here again, like same as with like control design, you can get very creative. And it's at the end, it is very important to have those, so you can actually understand, okay, how well are we doing?
Mm-hmm. How does reporting, like what level of detail do you have at the various levels of organization? For instance, like what bubbles up to the CEO and maybe board meetings versus what is the type of metric that engineering tracks, and what are some of the deliverables? And I'm thinking of, some of these compliance companies have trust pages, right? Where it's literally like a website that shows me if my checks failed or not, right? Ironically, they never fail on these trust pages. They're always like a green check mark.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
but they're compliance reports, right, from an auditor. I don't know if they're board. Like, what are some of the reports or deliverables from this phase, like actionable things I can see, touch, forward in an email, post into a Slack channel, that type of stuff?
Yeah, so in terms of KPIs, I
Mm-hmm.
guess those should be, regularly discussed with your leadership, with the company's leadership, potentially depending on, how the culture is, it's communicated with the whole company, so everybody can see how well we are doing. And that can also be pretty encouraging. But things like audit reports, yeah, those are definitely shared with leadership, and you definitely want to have like some sort of a retro perspective on the audit. What went well, what didn't? If something didn't went well, what are we going to do about it? Yeah, like the board of directors, the environments I have been part of, they had been too small that the board of directors would have been involved like into the actual specifics around this. So usually it was, leadership being aware, and they would communicate things like, okay, great, we are SOC 2 compliant now, or whatnot. But yeah, that has been it, essentially. So yeah, the deliverables are, I think, yeah, your KPIs that you can possibly communicate with everyone, and reports, lots of reports, penetration testing as well, vulnerability scans, and certain metrics you establish your own. As you mentioned, engineering, they might track something like time to remediation for certain issues. That can also be good to see how quick can you solve an incident, how quickly can you solve a vulnerability or whatnot. So yeah, all different flavors, nothing set into stone, and you can freely choose what works best for you.
Is there a is there a tool that comes to mind or something built in-house? Like or is it actually like, do you actually look at information and dashboards and reports, or is it more like on the process side, when if something happens, then the process sets an action?
Yeah, it can pretty much be both.
Both.
I don't have like too many dashboards or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are tools that come up with these dashboards. Some metrics you establish on your own, and you're sort of building your own dashboards then. Some things are process related, like the audit reports, you get them, okay, and now you trigger a retro perspective on that. But yeah, same as before, like you can do that as you like. I think, there are multiple ways that will lead you to success. But best point is to get started on metrics and measure them. Like that's what you definitely should do.
Yeah. Which I guess then takes you back to step one, connect, because now you're talking to the same people again.
Oh, yeah.
And now you have a process in place, right? And you collaborate on improving the process with whatever metrics you're tracking.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, basically, you can go through these steps again and again. As you said, like security and compliance, it's never really done. New things will be arriving, the business will be changing. You might have new business lines, you might have new products, you might want to go into new markets. We had that in Stana as well. And at some point, we were thinking about, okay, how do we get those governmental contractors? FedRAMP is a whole different league than ASOC 2, and that would have required different resources, like more people being involved into implementing these things, budgetary resources for, I don't know, certain toolings, and again, getting more people and whatnot. So that would have been a different league. And so you need always stay in touch with the business and
Yeah.
what's happening right now and what's coming up next. Like you want to know that as soon as possible.
I remember the FedRAMP discussions. We were actually talking about that and talking to vendors, but then, the IBM acquisition happened. And yeah, I remember that. Okay, so now we've covered all the 5 steps. And let's talk a little bit about how we turn this framework into action when you're an early stage company, you're the founder, you're the CEO, or you're the CTO, whoever is tasked to do this. What is your recommendation to folks who want to implement a security compliance program, apart from hiring someone like you, maybe even as a consultant? But what are what are the things I need to think about in terms of people, but also budget? Like, what are we talking about in terms of budget? And put your salary on the side. Like, what else do I need to think about in terms of allocating your resources to a program like this?
Oh, good point. So first up, okay, like you mentioned somebody already wanting to implement that. That's already a good starting point. For the founders out there, the advice I can give is like don't avoid it. At some point you will need it. But your customers will tell you that's for sure. So yeah, if you are in that position of, hey, I want to get started, there are numerous toolings out there that help you to look at different frameworks, tracking them and getting them implemented, like having a little bit of help also on the sidelines that explain you how frameworks are thinking about controls. So that's usually like a good starting point if you don't know the framework at all. Um, and yeah, in terms of budget, that can be really, really different. Like lots of like the SOC 2 framework. In essence, it won't ever tell you buy solution X. So it's up to you to design your controls and to make it appropriate to risks. But yeah, you can also implement like lots of open source tools. That's also possible, right? It will come with different costs, usually related to workloads. But yeah, truth is, a SOC 2, for instance, it is expensive. Like if you don't want to just use open source tooling, and if you do need to have some tooling in place, then there will be a couple of, not hundreds of thousands, but yeah, let's say, I don't know, 40K or something, 50K. Of course, that can be like, that can be changing a lot depending on what you want to do actually. But the auditor will cost money, some tools will cost money, your own workload will also cost something. But that's sort of, the range in which you can be getting into, just to have like a rough understanding there.
Yeah.
But
So the budget is really like I mean, this is a generic one, right? Obviously,
yeah,
salaries for internal people. I guess there's something like a full-time information security officer like you, and maybe there's a cloud security engineer on the infrastructure team. So there are actually internal dedicated resources, resources dedicated to security, right? There's tooling for, I guess, capturing the frameworks, something like SOC 2, right? That automate these processes. And then there's the cost for auditors, correct?
yeah.
What about insurance? Actual
Oh yeah,
cyber insurance? Yeah.
yeah. Good point. Yeah, you will need to have that. It's usually also a part of like for SOC 2, it's part of the framework. That also can be added to the list. Yeah.
Yeah. So salaries, tooling cost, auditors, right? And then insurance. Those are the 4 buckets that I have right now. I don't know. Do we forget anything? Any fifth
Um,
bucket?
no, I don't think so. That should cover the majority, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So I think we covered a lot of ground here. I have one question for you towards the end. Now that the difference between insecurity and compliance. What is it? Right answers only.
Oh wow, yeah. I'm sure I will get some great comments on that. So yeah, to me, compliance is about having requirements such as a framework or a certain law that you are going to implement to be compliant to those. And security can be completely independent from that and just deals with, securing the confidentiality, integrity, availability of the data, or let's say of the assets you have inside the organization. So yeah, compliance usually is relatively specific, have X, Y, and Z in place, basically like a checkbox exercise. And security will require you to be way more, focused around threats and technical mitigations and whatnot. So that's sort of where I'm drawing the line between those disciplines. But they do go hand in hand, right? Like lots of compliance is actually the foundation of why certain security controls are put into place, like having threat detection or whatnot. Oh yeah.
Great answer. Very clear. No, because the boundaries are often like, which one is it, right? And I think it also determines sort of what activities and tooling you pursue. Mirko, this was amazing. Lots of knowledge
Thank
that
you.
you conveyed. How can people reach you and work with you, or at least get your input? Like, what's the best way of getting in touch with you?
Well, sure. My LinkedIn is always a great place to get in touch. Yeah, so I do try to read everything that's coming through there. And yeah, I'm definitely open to, connect with people, you know, talk about challenges, and whatnot. So yeah, LinkedIn is a great place to reach out.
Awesome. Mirko, this was amazing. Mirco Kater, Information Security Officer at Gitpod. And yeah, thank you, Mirko. Thanks for your time. This was amazing. I expect a lot of great feedback for this
Thank you.
episode. All
Thank you,
right.
and